be at the beginning of the everyday warrior. How difficult it is to get something like that off the ground. I mean, that's not an easy task.
I would rather go back to war for 10 more combat deployments than start another business. I have a high degree of respect for leaders in the private sector, which I often refer to as warriors within their respective profession.
Look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, did I give these individuals the tools to be successful?
Greatest lessons for me in my life is that I will never violate my core values. There's adventure. People will laugh at the banter, they'll cry at the stories. May 11th through the 16th, we've got red carpet premieres.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Think Tank. I'm your host, Trey Holder. Today I'm honored to have one of my closest friends, Mike Sarraille, on. I met Mike probably, over a decade ago. You know, Mike's the kind of guy that every time you get off the phone, you feel like you need to go do something else with your life. Mike was Marine Recon, SEAL Team 3, SEAL Team 6, 10 deployments overseas for our country, and then actually got an undergrad at A&M, and then course corrected, I like to tell him, he got his MBA at Texas. So one of the few guys I know that has a degree from two rival universities. But Mike, super happy to have you on the podcast today. Appreciate you joining.
Thanks for having me, Trey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely touched on some of your background there, but maybe you can give our audience a little bit more color on your background.
Yeah, I think you hit most of it. Consider myself a reborn again Texan, but was born in California in the Bay Area. Just had a calling to the military. Met some very just inspirational guys that I wanted to be like. First one was a Force Recon Marine, so hence why I joined the Marines, became a Recon Marine, Scout Sniper, and then the Marine Corps said, hey, do you want to become an officer? Answer was yes, the war hadn't started yet, or 9/11 hadn't happened, so they sent me to A&M, which was a culture shock coming from San Diego. I enjoyed it so much, I finished in 3 years and got out of there as quickly as possible, but I'm thankful to Texas A&M for the opportunity they gave me. So switched over from the Marine Corps after Marine OCS to the SEAL teams, became a Navy officer. And the rest is history. As you said, SEAL Team 3 and JSOC, 10 combat deployments. And then I've been, when I got out at 20 years, I was an old man in the UT MBA program. But it was, part of the evolution required for me to learn the business side. And it was cool. I think I probably have liked to just get in the arena first before going to get the MBA. But the path has proven successful, and I've had failures, that by textbook definitions. But that's where the greatest lessons lie. Unfortunately, I had to pay a lot of money for those lessons. But it's been an interesting path going from consulting to now really entertainment, as well as still doing keynote speaking. I'm a 2023 and 2024 Global Gurus top 30 leadership speaker in the world. So spend a lot of time on the road speaking at conventions or companies on leadership, culture, high-performing teams, which is a passion of mine. Doesn't necessarily mean I was good at it. I'm a student of it, but I think I've got some concepts, having been on some high-performing teams that the public would agree they sort of hold on a pedestal, and passing those lessons to businesses so that they can create as close of an environment as possible.
Yeah, well, you and I have had a lot of fun together. Had some successes and failures, as you said. That's just kind of part of it, right? You just got to keep moving forward. I really enjoyed, building the. I guess if we were originally Echelon Front Overwatch with Jocko in that group, and then moved it over to the Talent War group. And I know you're still running that organization today, but learned a lot from you, and really enjoyed working with you. I know we've talked about this on a former podcast, and I know we didn't necessarily say we're going to talk about this today. It's a little bit more about brands and sports and all the stuff that you've got going on. But yeah, since you touched on leadership, I mean, what do you consider is the primary tenet of a culture with great leadership?
It comes down. Well, let me say this: if you ask 100 people what their definition of leadership is, they're going to give you 100 different answers. and each of them is correct because people are entitled their definition based off their perspectives and experiences. But for me, leadership comes down to behavior. And what is culture? Behavior at scale, trying to replicate those beliefs, those values, those attitudes, those daily routines and habits, your core values, trying to replicate that on scale within your organization. If you can do that to some degree of success, you're going to outmaneuver your competition regardless of what field you're in. But when it comes to cultures, I say this, you can put some lavish or some words on your lavish lobby wall, like in excellence, in commitment, in integrity, which, and I believe communication is what Enron had on their wall. It doesn't matter. Like if you don't have a culture rooted in accountability, it's not to say you don't have a culture. You do. You just really don't have a culture worth a damn. In the highest form, I'm big on talking about leading from the heart or leading with love. The highest form of compassion is accountability. And if you take it from the perspective of a parent, you see your child do something wrong, you come in and you try to aid in their learning to counter correct that behavior. Because at the end of the day, whether you're leading people or leading your children, you want to create this unbroken chain of excellence. You want to create kind, empathetic, respectful, highly competent human beings who contribute to their organization or society as a whole. But more importantly, the ability to critically think and learn when they fall down, because you're not going to be there forever. And there's great individuals in the military, and there's amazing leaders in the private sector that have done this well. But they've been out of the military for 20 years, and their presence is still felt in the young soldiers they train that are now running our military. And it's that unbroken chain of excellence that I'm big about. I call it the legacy of leadership. And ultimately, you don't get to determine your legacy. Your people do. So as leaders, you've got to deliver results. I always use college football. If a coach isn't putting W's on the board, he's gone. But what a lot of leaders lose sight on is that, yes, your job is to deliver outcomes, but it's also to train the next generation of leaders coming behind you to be better than you were, so the organization continues to accelerate well beyond your tenure.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love one of your favorite things, I think I've heard you say plenty of times, is you don't get to decide if you're a good leader. Your people decide whether you're a good leader. And totally agree with you, by the way, I've always talked about that as well. Introspection and accountability is really the best trait I think a leader can have, and being able to illustrate that to others and not place blame. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, did I give these individuals the tools to be successful? And, a lot of times you find that the fault is actually on your own, and you've got to rectify that and then go and teach others to do that. So we're jumping into some other stuff. So, I was fortunate to be at the beginning of the Everyday Warrior with you. So we had a lot of fun getting that off the ground, and you've taken that thing into a new stratosphere. Talk a little bit about, how difficult it is to get something like that off the ground. That's not an easy task.
Well, let me say this. I would rather go back to war for 10 more combat deployments than start another business. I have a high degree of respect for leaders in the private sector, which I often refer to as warriors within their respective profession. Where I served, if we wanted it, we got it. If we needed it, it was provided. You don't have that luxury in the private sector. It is one of the most resource-constrained environments I've ever seen. And we all know great leaders conduct some sort of reflection or analysis on every dollar spent to ensure that it has a return on investment. And I'm also, let me be honest, leadership in the military is not as hard as you think, because people have bled, they've sweat, they've cried for to get into the SEALs, a 1-year program. They have this emotional buy-in. And, they're driven by such a sense of purpose and pride. If I tell them, hey guys, we need to get this done, and they even disagree with the way we're going to do it, they can disagree, but they commit and they accomplish the mission. In the private sector, you don't have that luxury. You've got people that are more coin driven. You see in the tech sector, I think it's like on average, people are jumping from one tech company to another after 1.5 years because somebody makes a bigger offer. There's very, very little loyalty. And so that's why leadership in the private sector, you've got to master leadership more so sometimes than we did in the military. And at the end of the day, everything comes down to relationships. Where I'm going with that is, entrepreneurship is great. I like being my own boss, but there was a great clip by Dana White. Entrepreneurs don't get vacations.
Nope.
They don't get.
This has never happened before.
They're working nonstop. There are
Go to
no
read 'em?
holidays. And so, same thing with the brand. If you're not willing to commit to excellence, to go as far as it's going to take to grow it and then beyond, then don't engage in the endeavor. Don't just don't if you're not willing to put that work in, and then give it time. And lastly, with the brand, I'd say, I think what a lot of humans mistake is that the greatest currency in life is monetary. It's not. Drive impact first, create a community, and the money will follow. So if you always go after impact, you make the message something that provides value, especially in my line of work, because I'm not a consumer product good yet. Then people will tune in, and then sponsors will come. But it just takes time. And you look at podcasts. You may know this. I'm blanking on the numbers, but I think most podcasts don't make it beyond like 6 to 12 months, and I think there's something like 10 million podcasts. You've just got to keep going and keep going and keep going. And hopefully you're learning and iterating along the way to grow your viewership, and you go with what works. You stop doing it's stop, continue. Start doing the things that you're not, that could provide value. Stop doing the things that provide no value to your audience whatsoever, and continue the things that seem to be working. And it's time and a lot of commitment, and hopefully a lot of authenticity and just absolute genuineness, because people aren't dumb. They can read through BS, which there's a ton of BS out there on social media. I'm not a big social media guy. I don't post anything in my personal life, or very, very little. Everything is conversations with my guests or film products, documentaries that I'm working on. But I don't let them get a snapshot into my personal life. That's just a product of where I came from. We didn't have social media back then. We it's not that we weren't allowed to. It was frowned upon. But everyone has a microphone, and everyone is just spouting BS. Everyone's a motivational speaker now. But you ultimately have to look at the credibility of that person. And I don't want to seem judgmental, but it's, what has this person done? If it's merely building a following and an audience, that's an influencer, and I'm not an influencer. I listen to people that are credible. If I hear that, somebody, a esteemed business leader is speaking at the University of Texas, I'm going to go listen to that speech for what that man or woman has built, for what they've done, because they've been in the trenches. But it seems like with social media, it just, people with very little credibility they have a microphone, and again, that's maybe the beauty of capitalism. But I always caution who I listen to. And lastly, I'll say this. John Welborn, who's a good friend, played in the NFL for 10 years. He's got this motto of kill your heroes. Don't put anyone on a pedestal. And I was part of a group where it was almost like a sycophantish cult. And quickly, it was actually my wife, and you know what I'm talking about, is like, these are not your people. Yeah. Don't put me on a pedestal. I'm as flawed as the next man or woman. And, you want to be careful about who you follow and who you listen, because it does impact and shape your life. And heroism, quite frankly, my perspective, having come from the combat of arms, heroism is for the dead. Everyone is just a storyteller, and some people do it exceptionally. I'm not saying I fall in that category. I always say I'm a exceptionally mediocre podcast host and keynote speaker. But you've got to be weary, and ultimately you've got to be willing to put the work in and just stick with it.
Well, I'll champion you, brother, because I know you're humble. You're way better than mediocre at speaking. Now, you're podcasting, I'm just kidding. No, dude, you're awesome, man. No, I actually, anybody listening to this, I would implore you to hire Mike to come and speak to your team, because, your speech, one of my favorite speeches you do is the one that you gave to the, to the Marine Corps. out on YouTube. I mean, that's a fantastic speech, and it's about what you talked about earlier, right? It's about the love of brotherhood and what that means, and the guys beating their chest that they're the baddest are usually the ones in the corner crying when the bombs drop, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's the truth in a lot of aspects of life. So I know you said you're not an amazing storyteller, but you did mention, going through. By the way, I think you are, but you did mention going through, the SEAL teams and everything like that. Any stories or anything fun around, there's this mystique around Hell Week and buds and all of that stuff. And I'm sure people always want to know, like, how difficult is that really? How hard is it? Maybe you can share with the audience how difficult it is to go through that Hell Week.
It's difficult. There's no sugarcoating that. You have to understand, I'd already been through Marine Recon assessment and selection, which is extremely difficult as well. Went through sniper school, which the attrition rate is through the roof. The best way to answer that is when I got commissioned the same day I got honorably discharged as a sergeant from the Marine Corps, and literally 5 minutes or 30 minutes later got commissioned as an ensign in the Navy. So I had to switch uniforms. And I had a great mentor. He was also a Mustang prior enlisted officer, is what we call Mustangs. And we were walking back to the ROTC building at Texas A&M. It was just me and him. We're chatting. He'd been a longtime mentor. And he said, "Hey, can I give you a piece of advice for buds?" And I said, "Of course, sir." And he's like, "If you quit, you'll embarrass the Marine Corps." And we literally stopped in our tracks and were bent over in uniform on our knees, just crying, laughing. And he was making a joke, but we all know there's always a hint of truth in every joke. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm like, thank you. So there was no way I was going to fail SEAL training unless I was severely injured, and there's nothing you can do about that. So I focused on leading. And when I stepped in, at this point, I've got 5 years in the military. I've got some qualifications, and most of the students don't. They're coming out of high school or college right out of an AV boot camp into SEAL training. So, you sort of get this positional respect for what I've done with amongst the students, and so they sort of looked at me as sort of the leader, and I can step up in those situations. I don't want to say loud, but lead with authority. And so a lot of guys leaned on me, and so I just focused on leading through that week and blocking out the pain as best as I could. And the motto of it isn't about me. Let me help as many of these guys get through training by simply some kind or inspiring words at a moment they were hurting. And so I focused on that, and I think it made it a little more of an enjoyable of an experience for me. It still sucked. But, the thing with a lot of military speakers is, like, I've got 10 combat deployments. I've got stories. Is getting away from those stories. It's very much a part of my DNA. It always will be until the day I die, much like the World War II guys, and the Vietnam veterans and the Korean veterans. But I'm focusing on utilizing the tools I took from world-class leaders in how they operationally ran our unit, which is an organization, whether in the private sector or military, and evolving that within the business world and how that can assist companies who are struggling to build those teams or build that culture or to even define that culture from which to grow. And that's my primary focus. I'll leave, and I'm not, no judgment. Some guys will continue to talk about the combat stories for the rest of their lives. We lost a lot of guys. Those are the stories I tell in order to keep their legacies alive. But I was surrounded by such good men and women. It's that old Isaac Newton quote, "If I've seen further, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants." Those were the men and women that stood to my left and right, and I learned so much from them. And those are the stories I tell, not my own.
Yeah. Well, I can testify to that. I mean, I known you for a long time, and I'm not sure I've heard many stories, if any, really, about your combat deployment. So you keep that pretty close to the vest and focus on moving forward. I do get to hear a lot about you jumping out of airplanes. And all the crazy stuff that you do. There's no question about that. So, well, yeah, just real quick before we get into some of the stuff that you're up to today, if you were to give one piece of advice to anybody, and we touched on this stuff a little bit, but there was starting a brand, what would be that piece of advice that you'd give to them?
I think a lot of people are chasing fame, or they're chasing money. Is if you want something to resonate, it's got to be authentic to you. It's got to be genuine to you. And if it's not, I'm not saying you can't sell that through a great integrated marketing or media campaign or strategy. But if people truly know you're being authentic about whatever you're putting out into the world, I think you can create a much more loyal community. Not cultish, but more loyal. So it's got to be authentic. It's got to be genuine, and you've got to think through that. And I'll be the first person. I violated my core values by going to work for an organization because I went through a divorce, paying for an MBA, pretty much broke, and I knew they were making money hand over fist. And it's not that I don't appreciate the money I did. It changed the trajectory of my family, but I could only take that for about 2 years, again, until my wife looked at me and she's like, this just isn't you. You're trying to be, you're being a loyal company man to them by preaching the message, but this isn't your message, and it's chest beating. And I looked at her and I'm like, yeah, I've known this for quite a while, and I just want to take care of my family. And it was my wife who said, break off, do your own thing that's authentic to you. And she's like, we'll figure out the rest. And without the support of, and you know Jordan very well, you were at our wedding, and support from mentors like you, because I am a product of nothing more than a lot of good coaches and mentors and people who have poured into my life. But that was one of the greatest lessons, and this is post-military, greatest lessons for me in my life is that I will never violate my core values for money. I've gotten offers, and I'm just like, you know what? I just can't get behind this. It's not for me. And that's tough to turn away a check. But I think just the way I'm built, I'll crumble spiritually if I'm doing something that's not true to again, my mindset, my beliefs, my values, my attitudes. And that's been a hard lesson learned. And it's also changed my relationship with money, quite frankly. Not that I don't want money, but I'd rather have my cup full mentally and spiritually than being rich in the bank. And you've heard me say this before. Maybe I stole this from you. You've met a lot of people that are rich in the bank, absolutely poor in character. And I've met so many people that don't have much that are impacting the community around them, who are just full of just great character. And so I'm trying to find the balance between the two of them.
Yeah, it's a hard balance. It's interesting. We've done a number of these podcasts now, started to stack them up, but authenticity really is, a string or a theme that goes through what everybody has to say. And I think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier. There's so much noise out there today that really trying to find your authentic voice is important, and then being true to that. And, some of the counsel and advice we give to some of these young college athletes now that have the opportunity to monetize, and they may come from not a lot of money, and all of a sudden there's this opportunity to make $10,000 to do a quick post, but you got to be thinking long term. Does that brand represent who you are? And that's got to, that's very difficult for a lot of people, right, that haven't had means before. So, but I think it's a message that seems to be consistent across everybody that we talk to, whether it be marketers, professionals, executives, former military leaders, etc.
I've got a good one for you. This one's actually recent. So I hired a company to help me formalize my keynote speaking. I'd written 2 books, The Everyday Warrior, No Hack, Practical Approach to Life, and then Talent War, How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. And both have, I self-published, wasn't going for the New York Times or Wall Street Journal because there's a process to do that. Didn't want to deal with the big 5 publishers. I want to do it on my own. Well, I've never formalized my keynote speaking. I don't even have a speaker reel. The reference you made to me speaking to the Marines, one, for companies that watch that, understand I'm speaking to a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds. So I wanted to create a message that may not necessarily resonate with the company, even though we've gotten great feedback from it. But it was for those Marines who were preparing to go on deployment, and I wanted to give them or maturate them in a way that, quite frankly, I wish I had had when I was 18 to 22. But this company looked at other speakers, and they came back and they said, hey, listen, we've got less credible speakers who have not done anything near to what you have on your resume, who are making 3 times what you're making as a keynote speaker. In 81% of all keynotes are secured through a speaker reel. And I was actually shocked by that. I'm like, oh, damn. So they're like, you sort of stumbled into success because of the media you're involved in, but if you formalize this, you'll do a lot better. But they also said this. They said, hey, you've got a few clips of you on Fox News, and we have no doubt you're losing business because of that. And let me tell you, I've worked with a lot of news outlets. Nobody operates like Fox News does. The only reason I put a smile on my face to go to New York is when I'm going in studio in Fox to talk about usually geopolitics. And you could see, all I don't hate anyone except for Islamic extremists. I don't hate anyone. Kindness, empathy, and respect are huge to me. We may disagree. It doesn't mean we need to be in each other's tribes or circles, and that's fine. I wish you peace and prosperity. But they said, you are losing out on business from maybe companies that are left of center, and I'm a centrist, socially moderate, fiscally conservative. They said you are losing probably a lot of business because of that. I said, okay, awesome. I'm still going to do it. And if a company doesn't want to call on me because I went and spoke about the Israeli-Hamas-Iran conflict with pragmatic, unemotional views, then they're not for me. So I don't think I would be doing that unless I had that experience with that company for 2 years where I told you I learned a lot about my core values. I'm going to stick with who I am, what I know. And if you try to sell to everyone, and you know this, you sell to no one. And maybe I know what my base is, and I don't want to say I pander to the base, but that's my total addressable market, or not total addressable market, but my smaller niche within that total addressable market. That's it. That's who I am. And if some tech agency or tech company in Silicon Valley, where I was born, doesn't want to bring me in because they don't think that I have an empathetic, respectful view, you know what? They're wrong. And that's their decision to make. It's capitalism, and each person has a decision, and that's fine with me.
No, I appreciate that. I've always appreciated that about your character. I'd say one thing just to add in my perspective on, when you're launching a brand, because I've failed. So, right, we learn through adversity and we learn through failure. And, one thing I would say, be careful out there, do the research, before you launch something. One of the things, it's very easy to get caught in confirmation bias, right? You got 4 guys and, some guys drinking beer, and you're like, hey man, we should create a blue rubber ducky. This doesn't exist, right? And then it's going to be the best, greatest thing ever. And you don't do the research. You go spend a bunch of money on launching something and realize, hey, nobody really wanted this product. So I would give that counsel out to the audience as well, is don't get caught in confirmation bias.
We fall in love with our own idea. And again, the education I got in the SEAL teams, I had a master chief, had a lot of combat experience. We briefed an operation, conceptually what we were going to do. And he was the last one to say anything. And he was just a quiet guy. He said, don't confuse your enthusiasm with your capability. You've got to put a lot of research into whatever you're going to do, because if you fail to plan, then you better plan to fail. And there is a balance. Some people stay in the analysis, planning phase forever and just never take the leap. So, when is the right time to make the leap from thorough planning? It depends. But, when I wrote my first book, I just, I don't fall in love with anything I do. I'm always very critical of myself. And a very seasoned New York Times bestseller said, well, how do you feel about your book? And I'm like, I hate it. He's like, then it's ready to push it to the world. and I'm like, that makes no sense. He's like, if you hate your own book, it's because you poured so much into it. And at some point, you just got to let it fly. You're never going to create the perfect book. You're going to read things a year later and be like, you know what, I've evolved on that standpoint. And he was right. And we had spent 2.5 years in the book, and it was time, and we got it out there, and it created a strong niche within, C-suite executives, HR professionals, CHROs, talent officers. And I'm glad I got that advice of just, hey, you've done the planning, you've done the work, let it fly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's jump into some of the stuff you've been up to. So I know, I know we actually helped at when we owned the Men's Journal, A360 Media. I'm wearing my colors today with your original kind of drop zone deal at Everest. I think that was your first foray into actually doing a documentary, and I know you did that, for charity. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then the records you broke on your most latest venture. I know you got a movie coming out, which I'm super excited to go to the premiere at. But start off with Drop Zone, what that was all about.
So, I had a hip replacement at 41, not because I was out of shape. It was because we just went hard on our bodies in special operations. And I was sitting there, and when you're sitting on the couch for 2 months, you've got a lot of time to think. And I just missed a couple things. I've got a great life. I've got a great wife, kids, but I missed the boys. I am passionate about the guys that we lost and keeping their legacies alive. And the only way to do that is to tell their stories in a meaningful way. And so, a few months after I was in the recovery, somebody said, hey, so-and-so is going to lead a team to skydive into Everest. And I'm like, And I hadn't skydived for 5 years. He didn't know that. I called him and said, hey, man, what does it take to get on this trip? Well, it's this much money. And, he's like, when's the last time you skydived? And I'm like, a month ago? And he's like, okay, just make sure you're current. We're going to do some training before we go out to Everest. We went out to Colorado for a week to train on the highest drop zones in the U.S. And I fell back into it. And we eventually went to Everest. I did that in honor of Extortion 17. 31 Americans killed aboard a helicopter, which was the single largest loss of life incident in Afghanistan. And so I was going to do the trip in their honor through the documentary. We were going to tell their stories. We were low on budget. I don't think we did the best job we could doing that. I would have loved to have gone to the homes of the families of the fallen to get their stories. I was particularly close to one teammate's widow, Carrie Mills, who supported me. But we raised $200,000 on that one, jumping in around Mount Everest through that trip and the documentary. And that money went to the education of spouses and kids who lost their parent or their loved ones in the war. And then from there, that was really the test bed of legacy expeditions in honor of the fallen.
I want to make sure the audience knows what you actually did, which was wild, right? So you took, a helicopter up above, I know you were wearing masks. What was it, 35,000 feet? Or how high did you jump from?
I think the highest we got was 25,000 feet. Really anything over 18,000 above sea level requires oxygen just due to the altitude and how thin the air is. But yeah, we would take helicopters using katabatic winds off the face of the mountain, which sometimes was a 45-minute flight, and then we would jump out of the helicopters. People can check it out. Drop Zone Everest. There's a few platforms streaming it still. And then from there, we did a trip to Iceland, and then there's this sort of feat within the international skydiving community, which they said it can't be done. Trying to jump on all 7 continents within 7 days. And we are now at the 3-year point. It took me 18 months to plan. It took, of course, 1 month to execute because we had to stay in Antarctica. That's where we started for about 10 days. And then we've been in post-production of the documentary. So 9 special operators. I put this all together. I had to go raise the money. Some guys were helping, 2 in particular were helping coordinate the drop zones. But it really was, in my line of work, amateurs talk tactics. Professionals talk logistics. What happens on a target is the easy part. We've trained to it so well, but how do I get to that target in austere conditions? How do I get support overhead? How do I get everyone home? What are the contingencies involved? So everyone said we needed a private jet. I just couldn't raise the money to do that, so it was never in the cards. That alone would have cost $1.5 million for a private jet. So we flew commercial, which people are like, yeah, that you guys maybe can do it in 12 to 14 days if you're flying commercial. I took the model I learned in special operations, applied it to this in 18 months. We took off January of 2023, sat in Antarctica for a number of days, and then the day the jet was coming to pick us up, we had another airplane there. We jumped out of it. We ultimately did it. I mean, the week we did it, and landed in Miami was the day the FAA shut down the NOTAM system because there was, I think, a hack or cyber attack. And that was the first time the FAA had shut down the NOTAMs, which regulates all flights, for the first time since 9/11. Literally, I've been planning this for 18 months, and that was not in the contingency card. And so you talk about problem solving. I brought the 9 guys together. It was our one Canadian counterpart who was on the trip, former special operations, who actually came up with a solution and made it happen. And that's the power of the teams, that brain trust. But Dan Myrick, who did the Blair Witch Project, and if you don't know what the Blair Witch Project is, came out in 1999, broke every indie record. He did the film for $37,000. It grossed $238 million at the box office. Created a whole genre of horror films. He followed us with the crew and documented the whole thing, and that's what we've been dealing with for the last 18 months since the trip's been over. And we got picked up for theaters. So May 11th through the 16th, we've got red carpet premieres in New York, Tampa, Austin, Dallas, and LA. And then it'll run in theaters, select theaters across the nation from May 31st to July 4th. And it really is like Jimmy Chin, Free Solo combined with, Band of Brothers. There's adventure. People will laugh at the banter. They'll cry at the stories. We've gotten such rave reviews. Even Cole Needham, the founder of IMDb, which was bought by Amazon in 1998, we got him a copy because he came on my podcast, and he said, this is a lovely film. And he sent me a picture of his in-home theater. He sent me a picture of it up on the screen. He's like, you guys crushed this. So we're excited to get this out. This is my first foray. I'm a little nervous right now. Are we going to fill the theaters? Are people going to like it? But more importantly, we jumped in honor of 7 service members, 1 for each continent. And, 2 things here. One of my partners in Legacy Studios, Christian Kreppel, he said, could you imagine if they made Band of Brothers in the 1960s? How society would have looked at those men differently, how their families would have looked at those men differently because they don't tell war stories, especially that generation. They just came home and got back to work. But could you imagine the impact that would have had on recruiting in society as a whole? And it's a great point. But the other point I want to make is if I go up to an average American on the street and say, name somebody who died in Afghanistan or Iraq, you won't get an answer. They'll sit there trying not to be disrespectful, and I don't find it disrespectful. They just can't give you a name. And so if the names of these 7 that we jumped in honor of, and it's all throughout the documentary, if one American can remember one of those names, just one, then it was worth all the personal money I've spent, and I'm deep in this one, both time and money, then it was absolutely worth it. And we're also raising money for Folds of Honor, which is a great organization. We've raised about $2 million thus far. We had a goal of $7 million. We know we'll raise a lot more through these the movie because they're everywhere. The mechanism to donate is in the film. It's worth it. But the story of these guys, and these were flawed individuals, but they were warriors, and they stood for something in life, and they weren't willing to bend to the point where they redefined the meaning of selflessness in giving their lives for their country and knowing that the families back home would have to pay the cost. Their sons, their daughters, their wives, their extended family, they don't get the luxury of continuing on in life with them. And if you look at these lives, as we as Americans are playing all these reindeer games, as I say, acting with such, a lack of professionalism and civility, these guys might have been warriors in what people's perception of warriors, where I come from, are shaped by Hollywood, and Hollywood has done a pretty bad job. You look at Oliver Stone with Platoon. Everyone thinks that they're just a bunch of maniacs who are uneducated. That's actually far from the truth. They're high in intellectual horsepower. I used these words before. They're kind, they're empathetic, respectful. You would never know. They're the first ones to pull over on the side of the road if they saw you, Trey, and your family with a flat, and they'd simply say, "Hey, sir, ma'am, how can I be of assistance to you?" And the way they live their lives with such accountability and discipline and commitment and honor and loyalty, if more Americans conducted themselves like these men and women, dude, this country would be a much better place. And I'm on my political rant, but it's not meant to be political. It's meant to be a net positive on society, and that's what I hope this film is.
No, listen, I appreciate you. And, one of the favorite parts of my life actually was when you and I were running that recruiting firm and spending so many time with, high-performing veterans and helping them transition and just amazing individuals. And, I really enjoyed that experience. Well, anyway, man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate everything you have done for your country, everything you continue to do for everybody that's around you and that's a part of your sphere of influence, which is continuing to grow. I'll leave you with, if you have I'll leave you with a bold prediction. Give us a bold prediction. I'm going to have a bold prediction that your movie's going to be a success, man. I can't wait to watch it. I can't wait to be with you at the premiere in Austin. It's going to be awesome. I've already seen the trailer. It certainly wasn't on the same adventure, but I was shut down in Cincinnati at an event with Kroger. So I remember that day too. I couldn't get home to my family, but certainly I wasn't out breaking any records or for any major cause. But why don't you leave the audience with a prediction? It could be about anything, man.
Well, first off, yeah, we ended up, not that they mattered, but we did set 4 world records by doing it, and shocked the skydiving community. Pissed off a lot of people in the skydiving community. I don't know why. I mean, you'd had one of the, let's just say, Middle Eastern crown princes tried to do this and didn't succeed. And then a group right after us, a month later, tried to do it, and they didn't succeed. But, I hope it does well. We've got a lot of work. We've got 1 month left, less than 1 month. So I'm not going to just put it out there and hope for the best. We're going to do everything we can from an integrated media campaign to make it so. So we own the outcome of this, and it's on us to get out to people who don't know us and get them to go to the film. So we've got work to do all the way up to the first premiere, and then a lot of work to do after that. So, yeah, we are going to try to make this as successful as we can by taking action.
All right, brother. Well, here's the deal, man. I mean, I'll do anything I can to help. I always will. I'll certainly
Likewise
do everything I can to support everything you do, man. And I really, truly appreciate you joining today. And, we will get this out before your premiere for sure and make sure we can help you fill those theaters.
And if people want to buy tickets, go to legacyexpeditions.com. The ticket platform is up there. And I think you'll be rather pleased and entertained, which at the end of the day, that's what matters.
Awesome, man. All right, well, I will see you soon, man. Appreciate your time.
All right, brother. Thank you.